If you're running lead generation ads on Facebook but have no idea which data you're looking for or how to scale your campaigns profitably, I'm going to show you exactly how you can scale up those campaigns profitably, what data to look at, how to scale them, and everything in between. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. So if you haven't yet watched my 2026 ads strategy, I would recommend going back and watching that because I kind of go over and break down each and every single campaign and what's inside it. But this is basically what's inside our one campaign. Is basically this same structure. So we have obviously our lookalike audience, retargeting audience, our stacked, which are basically a bunch of interests stacked into one, and then a broad targeting. This top one up here, you don't necessarily have to worry about this one. This one typically we run, it's an ad set that specifically just shows testimonials for clients that had scheduled an appointment within the last 3 days. So this is an example. This is a high ticket coach that we're going to be taking a look at. And as you can see in here, this is just some data over the last 24 to 48 hours. What we're going off of here is scheduled appointments. So what we're trying to get is obviously appointments scheduled is the goal of this campaign. The leads here, they're basically opt in to watch a free training, which is what triggers that cost per lead. And then anybody that actually books goes to the appointment column. This is basically our ad set structure. And as you can see here, we do have some data. So my recommendation is you have to, before running your first set of ads, is figuring out specifically what your KPIs and benchmarks are. That basically meaning what is your goal cost per booked call, what's your cost per acquisition that you're looking for, and what's your cost per lead that you're looking for. And again, it really kind of depends on the industry that you're in. Obviously, the higher ticket your item is, typically you can expect to have much more expensive cost per lead or cost per booked appointment. I would say industry average is somewhere for booked appointment wise, anywhere between $50 to $150 is where you would want to be. I've seen it upwards of $100 to $500 depending on how many frictional points that you have inside the funnel. If you're going for leads, my recommendation is trying to shoot somewhere between 10 to 50 cost per lead. Those are benchmarks, but you have to ask yourself these questions before you run because otherwise you're just kind of like shooting in the dark. And not necessarily knowing like what your KPIs are, because the KPIs will basically tell you, and for those that don't know, basically the KPIs are going to be the numbers that are going to tell us whether our ads are performing or not. With that being said, as you can see, we're prioritizing a lot of spend into our lookalike audience right now. Our broad has second most, and then obviously our retargeting and stacked. But with a lot of these benchmarks here, as you can see here, we're getting a pretty decent cost per booked appointment. Really kind of the goal for this campaign is to get cost per booked appointment sub $40 is our goal. It's a B2C offer, so the expectation is we'll probably have a much cheaper cost per appointment than if I was like a B2B. So as you can see here, we do have a handful of these ad sets that are performing well within KPI. And then obviously we have these that are a little bit more expensive over the last couple of days. And we'll kind of talk about how you would look at this data and decide which ones you would scale. What I would also recommend is before you start scaling, once you actually have set aside your KPIs of what you're trying to shoot for in order to be able to actually scale your business, the other things you actually have to have is what we call the hard deck. So hard deck is basically a number where it's like, that is the most I'm willing to pay cost per booked appointment, because the hard deck is basically going to allow you to pull all the emotions out of the picture and be able to logically say, hey, if this ad or if this campaign or this ad set is not performing at least this level, right? Say, for example, in this situation, maybe it's $60 cost per booked appointment. If anything goes, below that, and by below, I'm saying like $61, $62, $63, say, for example, no matter what happens, that is an underperforming campaign, underperforming ad set ad. So we have to make sure that not only do we have our KPIs, but we also have our hard deck that we know exactly when are we going to cut our losses. So the way to look at this is we want to look at our KPIs over the last 24 hours. So you want to set your Facebook ad account to the last 24 hours of the last day. You can usually look at, yesterday. Say, for example, you're looking at this on the 19th of January. You would look at the 18th of January. So what you would do is you would ask yourself, are we hitting our KPIs within the last 24 hours? Yes or no? So let's say, for example, in the situation that we're using here, let's say, for example, your cost per booked appointment in this case is your KPI is sub $40. So in this case, the lookalike audience, yes. The broad audience, yes. However, the retargeting stack obviously is above that. So let's just pretend for this example, let's go and say we're actually hitting our KPIs. So yes, now we're going to switch the time frame to 7 days. So instead of it looking over the last 24 hours, we would look at it now at the last 7 days. The reason why we then expand our time frame is because we don't necessarily want to look at everything over the last 24 hours. We just want to see, is it progressing in the right direction? That's what 24 hours is telling us. Now we look at it at the last 7 days because that's going to give us a larger time period to be able to look at these ads to see, hey, are they actually performing at scale? Then we ask the question, are we hitting KPIs over the last 7 days? So let's say, for example, yes, we are. In that case, we would scale the budget by 20%. If, let's say in the example that we have up here, let's say, for example, this one right here, which I think is our lookalike audience, is hitting our KPI, which is sub $40 cost per booked appointment, then we would scale up that $150 budget by 20%. So in this situation, 20% of 150 should be about $30. So we would scale that to $180. And then the same thing we would do directly for this one as well. Now, let's say, for example, over the last 7 days, we are not hitting KPI over the last 7 days. Then what we're going to do is we're going to leave the budget as is. So we're not going to add any budget to it. We're going to leave as is and then take a look at it again tomorrow. And so what this does is basically forcing us to not scale too quickly, because in that situation, if we're scaling too quickly, our ads might not be able to perform at that level. So we want to make sure that our ads are able to maintain at a steady level or hitting KPI before we scale. Because typically when you scale, your cost per acquisition, your ROAS will decrease. Your cost per acquisition will go up. Performance will decrease as you continue to scale because it's a numbers game. And even because your ads will start fatiguing, it will be more expensive because obviously people are now seeing the ad multiple times. It's not going to be able to maintain those KPIs. So what we don't want to do is, especially early on in a campaign, is we don't want to scale it too quickly, because more than likely if it can't scale at a low spend, it's not going to be able to scale at a high spend. Once you leave the budget, or if you decide to scale by 20%, in that situation, we would repeat the cycle the next day and then take a look at all of our data. Now, I will say you might want to wait 72 hours before, especially if you did scale the budget or decrease budget. You always want to wait about another 2 to 3 days to see what that performance is like. You can continue to look at it over a 24 period, but I wouldn't necessarily touch the budget unless, like, say for example, your KPI is $40 cost per booked appointment is what you're shooting for, and you're at like $20, so you're doing extremely well. Then you can be a little bit more aggressive with your spend. Now, let's say, for example, we're not hitting KPI within the last 24 hours. So in this case, the retargeting and the stacked, we completely missed our KPI. Well, in that situation, what we're going to do is we're going to check data over the last 7 days, just like we did with the other one. However, this time, if we are hitting our KPIs in this situation, let's say, for example, we look at the last 7 days and we are hitting it, instead of scaling, we're going to leave the budget as is. And the reason why is because we're noticing kind of a downtrend. So maybe it might just be a fluke of a day that we're noticing, or maybe yesterday was just a fluke. And so what we want to do is we don't want to go ahead and push budget yet. Let's see if it can actually recoup and our ads are not fatiguing. Now, let's say, for example, they aren't hitting the KPI over the last 7 days. Well, let's ask the question, did we hit our hard deck? Let's say, for example, our hard deck is $60 cost per booked appointment. Well, in that situation, let's just say, for example, let's make it a little bit easier. Let's say our hard deck in this situation is $70. Well, that means we hit hard deck here, but we didn't hit it here. So in that situation, now we have to ask ourselves, did we hit it? So did we hit hard deck? Let's say, for example, we didn't. Let's, like, for the one that says $67. Well, in that case, we're going to leave budget as is. Maybe it is over our KPI, but it's steadily going up. But again, we just want to leave it as is, see if the performance can come back. Now, let's say, for example, we hit our hard deck. In the case that we were just looking at, it was $71. Well, in that case, what we're going to do is we're going to decrease the budget by 20%. And the reason why we would just go ahead and pull that back is because maybe the ads can't perform at that higher spend, or what it needs is we just need new ads in order to take off some of the fatigue. Maybe some of those ads can only handle $30 to $40 a day. There could be a multitude of reasons. Maybe there's some issues with the funnel and that's causing the issue. But usually what we see is, even by just pulling back that budget by 20%, it's not the end of the world, but it's sometimes the best thing for the campaign, because what you can do is you can take 20% from here and then just allot 20% to the ones that are performing well. So that way you basically are spending the same amount of money, you're just getting better performance. The reason why we go by 20% increments, either increasing or decreasing, is because 20% is plenty enough for Facebook to not get overly saturated with too much money. Because if Facebook is getting you really good high quality leads, or getting you leads or hitting your KPIs, or even if it's missing it, if you increase the budget too quickly or decrease it too quickly, it can throw off your performance drastically. And that's just because Facebook may not be able to handle that new spend level because it's been so accustomed to the spend level that you're currently at. And so what we don't want to do is we don't want to throw that off. We want to be relatively gradual with it. And so 20% is a general rule of thumb of how you should increase or decrease your budget if you're looking at doing that. Now, I will say if you increase or decrease your budget, you can expect some of your performance to drop off over the next 24 to 48 hours. Usually takes Facebook almost 3 days to level back out at the new level that you're spending. So if you do see a decrease in performance, even when you pull the budget back or increase the budget, that's totally normal. Once you decrease the budget by 20%, it's basically going to follow the process of the last one. Now you're going to relook at this 24 to 48 hours later and just go through the cycle all over again. And I know it might feel like it's a long process because you're only increasing the budget by 20% every couple of days. But again, this is just kind of the process of scaling, and it's basically going to be almost like a bell curve, almost exponential in regards to 20% is going to increase, especially as the amount of money you're spending. Because 20%, say if you're spending $1,000 a day on ads, 20% is going to be $20, or excuse me, $200. So in that situation, obviously you're going to be able to scale much, much quicker because now you're putting a lot more funds into it. And so, early on, it might not be a lot, especially if you're spending like less than $50, you can increase your budget by $5 to $10 because obviously 20% of under $50 is not that much. In those situations, if you're spending less than $50 a day, I would just increase by $5 to $10 increments. And then once you surpass $50 in budget per day, then start following the 20% rule. Honestly, if you guys follow this strategy, it's going to help you guys a lot be able to scale profitably, but also scale with consistency as well. If you guys have any questions, make sure to drop all your questions in the chat. If you guys also haven't done so yet, make sure you're watching the Facebook ad strategy for 2026. With that being said, I'll catch you guys in the next lesson.